Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Emperor Palpatine spent years breaking down the institutions and checks and balances that guarded the Republic from tyranny. In doing so, he got rid of some of the most capable politicians, bureaucrats, and managers within the government system. This meant that with the rise of the New Order, the people who were left in government, who had not resigned or been imprisoned and killed, were a collection of sycophants, cowards, and bullies. And therefore, most of these institutions were useless. In order to get things done properly, Palpatine oftentimes cut through the bureaucracy and incompetence by appointing one of his many underlings to handle the tasks personally. These individuals were oftentimes given an unlimited amount of control, and their position usually lay outside of the traditional command chain. This was because they served as the hands and eyes and ears of Palpatine. Now, the surprising thing for me has always been who Palpatine chose to rely on the most. It wasn't Darth Vader, even though he was his apprentice and seen as Darth Sidious's enforcer. It wasn't Thrawn, the military genius from the unknown region. It wasn't Wraith Sinyar, a capable engineer and ambitious businessman who single-handedly transformed a boutique starship company into one of the largest shipyards in the galaxy. Nor was it Director Orson Krennic, the project manager who impressively kept Project Stardust hidden from the public and relatively on time. No, the individual that Palpatine trusted wasn't a Sith, nor was he an industrialist. He wasn't even a businessman or an inventor. Instead, he was a politician and a bureaucrat. We, of course, are talking about Wilhulf Tarkin. The relationship between Tarkin and Palpatine has always confused me quite a bit. Why did the Emperor trust him to establish the doctrine for the entire Imperial military? Why did he allow Tarkin to kill Director Orson Krennic and take over the Death Star in such a hostile manner? I mean, think about it. Would Palpatine been okay if Thrawn or Darth Vader did the same thing and just did a hostile takeover of the Death Star? I don't think so. Well, if we look at the relationship that Palpatine develops with Wilhulf, we might begin to get some answers. Like he did with Anakin Skywalker, Palpatine actually mentored Wilhulf Tarkin from a very young age. Tarkin probably reminded Palpatine of himself when he was young. Like Palpatine, Tarkin came from a noble family. The Tarkin clan was amongst the first pioneers to set foot on the planet of Eriadu. They would lead the fight in colonizing the rough and wild planet. And as a result, their family would develop a rich martial tradition, and they would set up the first militias in this part of the Outer Rim. The Tarkins would soon become one of the most powerful families in the region, and many Tarkins would govern and rule over the planet of Eriadu and lead its famous planetary defense force known as the Outland Region Security Force. But sometimes when a family has a great legacy, the individual members of the family are seen more as tools to preserve that legacy rather than individuals who are allowed to go off and do their own things. I think Tarkin and Palpatine would both struggle against the patriarchs of their own family for this reason. Both Tarkin and Palpatine did not want to follow the life planned out for them by their patriarchs. They wanted to establish their own footprint in the galaxy. When Tarkin was just 16 years old, he would be exposed to the Tarkin clan's brutal coming-to-age ceremony. He'd be dropped in a wilderness area known as the Carrion Plateau without any weapons or supplies, and he would spend days trying to survive encounters with gigantic alien lions. And this is really the Tarkin way. They were obsessed with their past, taming this wild world of Eriadu, fighting off monsters and bandits and pirates. As a result, young Wilhulf Tarkin developed a very paranoid and dark view of the galaxy. Most of his early education was focused on martial skills and survival. Tarkin would eventually join the Outland Region Security Force and was known for his brutality and cunning. While going up against the QAnon Marauders, Tarkin manages to capture their leader on her flagship, and he basically restrains the entire crew on that ship while he sends it on a slow, steady course towards a nearby sun. He would open up the communications and broadcast the last screams of the crew to the entire pirate network to send a message to everyone else. He was only 19 at the time. Eventually, Tarkin would head corewards and join the Solus Sector Spacefarers Academy and become a young officer within the Judicial Department's forces. This was the closest thing the Republic had to a security force at the time. It was around this time that Sheev Palpatine, a young senator of Naboo, would meet Wilhulf Tarkin for the first time. The two would hit it off, and Palpatine would offer to find Wilhulf Tarkin a place within the Republic's Judicial Academy. He also advised that Tarkin would eventually find his way towards politics. We don't really know what Palpatine saw in Tarkin in that first meeting. As a Sith Lord, he could read individuals through the Force, and he could tell right away that Tarkin was not a Force user. But contrary to popular belief, the Sith didn't just interact with other Sith. They didn't hate non-Force users. They might have seen them as inferior, but they definitely had uses for them. Sheev Palpatine, especially in his earlier years while under the tutelage of Darth Plagueis, was still a pretty rational actor. He was a senator and was still carefully plotting his own future course to taking over the Republic. In order to be successful, he needed allies, not just warriors and Sith assassins. He needed political operators, bureaucrats, and capable individuals he could rely on once he took power. In some ways, the fact that Tarkin was not a Force-sensitive individual made him less of a threat than someone like Darth Vader, who on numerous occasions tried to kill Palpatine and usurp him on the throne. And that's the problem with the Sith. Even in the Rule of Two era, the Master could never truly trust an apprentice, because their eventual goal was always to take over. Tarkin would never be the same kind of threat that Darth Vader could be. The legend of Tarkin would only grow during his stint within the Judicial Department. His natural toughness and survival abilities helped save many of his colleagues on various missions to the Outer Rim. But by 36 BBY, Tarkin would change his career path and finally follow the advice of Palpatine and pursue a career within politics. Tarkin also sensed that the galaxy was heading towards disaster and more conflict and danger, and that would be very, very dangerous for a young judicial officer like him. Tarkin, ever the opportunist, realized that in great conflict and turmoil, politicians had a lot more to gain than junior officers who were fighting on the ground. It was probably this kind of mentality that really attracted Chief Palpatine towards Wilhulf Tarkin in the first place. Wilhulf Tarkin was always different from his peers. He did come from money just like Palpatine, came from a noble family, but he also understood the desperation of being alone and hungry in the jungle. He was a fiend and willing to do anything to survive, and he was smart enough to be able to exploit situations to his advantage. I think, again, Palpatine saw a kindred spirit in Wilhulf Tarkin, and he viewed him as a useful tool to be used in the future. Tarkin would return back to his homeworld of Eriadu and run for governor successfully. It was during his reign that the famous or infamous Eriadu Trade Summit would be held. It was during that meeting that the entire Trade Federation's board would be assassinated. This would pave way for Nute Gunray's ascension. This was all a Sith orchestrated plan. Governor Tarkin would actually run interference and prevent Chancellor Finis Valorum from further investigating this incident. Valorum's reputation would suffer as a result, eventually leading to his ouster during the Naboo blockade. At the same time, Valorum's family shipping company would suffer, and Eriadu shipping and mining would take over a lot of the routes in the Outer Rim. Under Tarkin's rule, Eriadu would become a major transit hub and trade center on the Hydian Way, and it was here that precious raw Lomite shipments would be sent to the core worlds and eventually make it to shipyards like Fondor. Eriadu is quickly emerging as one of the most important planets in the Outer Rim. And this is all thanks to Tarkin. And soon this would attract the attention of another important ruler in the Outer Rim, Count Dooku of Serrano. Dooku wanted Tarkin to join him and his secessionist movement. Unbeknownst to Tarkin, Darth Sidious had asked Dooku to test Tarkin's loyalty. Tarkin would pass this test, and Eriadu would be open for business to the Republic all throughout the Clone Wars, and it would maintain those really important Lomite shipments to the military-industrial complex in the center of the Republic. I think without Eriadu, the Republic would have struggled to maintain control of the galaxy during the war. I mean, despite Tarkin's really ambitious nature, for whatever reason, he stayed loyal to Palpatine. And I think this is really important for the Sith Lord, and this is why he would eventually bring Tarkin into his inner circle. It was around this time that Tarkin would decide not to seek re-election for the governorship of Eriadu. He wanted to shift his efforts towards galactic politics, especially with the coming war about to change everything. During the Clone Wars, Tarkin would serve as a captain within the Republic Navy, and he would serve with bravery and distinction. Now, during the war, Tarkin would develop a very negative view of clones, especially clones who served beneath the command of the Jedi generals. He believed that the individuality of these clones developed was troubling. In a way, like Palpatine, Tarkin saw chaos in individuality in people who were not willing to conform. Ideologically speaking, Tarkin and Palpatine were very similar. They both wanted a lot of control, and that is because they feared chaos. In 20 BBY, Tarkin, along with Jedi General Even Peel, would be captured and placed in the Citadel prison. He would be rescued by a Jedi task force, which included Anakin Skywalker. During the meeting, Tarkin would question Anakin Skywalker on the Jedi's ideology.
You lack faith in the Jedi.
I find their tactics ineffective. The Jedi Code prevents them from going far enough to achieve victory, to do whatever it takes to win. The very reason why peacekeepers should not be leading a war. Have I offended you?
This would be the first time that these two favorites of Emperor Palpatine would meet.
No. I've also found that we sometimes fall short of victory because of our methods.
Well, I see we agree on something.
And it definitely wouldn't be the last. These two would have a respectful and somewhat competitive relationship all throughout the Imperial era. Tarkin would eventually ascend the military hierarchy and reach the rank of Admiral, at which point he became more involved with the strategic outlook of the war. He would be present during the Republic Strategy Conference on the space station Valor when it was almost blown up in a terrorist attack. He would blame the entire event on the Jedi for not securing the meeting point, which held several high-ranking Republic officers. Had the Separatist attack been successful, it could have dealt a huge blow to the Republic war effort. Tarkin would actually send a list of alternatives to Jedi commanders for the clone army, and I'm sure it was something that Palpatine really enjoyed reading. And later on in the war, when the Jedi Temple bombing occurred, it would be Wilhulf Tarkin who would serve as the main prosecutor against Ahsoka Tano during the trial. It was Tarkin who would push for execution of the Jedi traitor. All on his own, Tarkin had grown extremely suspicious and antagonistic against the Jedi, making him really a key player in the anti-Jedi movement within the Republic, a movement that would become key in shaping public sentiment after Order 66. Tarkin would be promoted to adjunct general after the trial, and he would basically return back to Coruscant and stay there for the remainder of the war, working right alongside Emperor Palpatine. Roughly around the same time, Palpatine drafted Tarkin into the Strategic Advisory Cell's Special Weapons Group. The main goal of this entire organization was to oversee the construction of the Death Star. While Tarkin didn't have the project managing experience and technical knowledge of director Orson Krennic, it was rumored from the very beginning that Palpatine wanted Tarkin to take over the project. We're not sure if these rumors were true or not. It's very possible that Palpatine planted these rumors himself. That might seem like a dumb idea. I mean, Krennic already had a tough enough job. Why make him even more stressed out? But if you're thinking like that, you're not thinking like the Sith. You see, the Sith believed in competition at every level. While they understood sometimes collaboration and cooperation were important to achieve a short-term goal, the strength of an individual was more important than anything else for them. And so in ancient times, the Sith academies would be ruthless places of competition. Sith students were encouraged to sabotage each other's works and even carry out violent attacks or even murder their colleagues, as long as no one found out that they did it, of course. There were generally no rules in Sith competitions for power, and this ultimately is why the Sith would always destroy themselves. Darth Bane created the rule of two because he realized that the Sith's worship of strength over all else made them chaotic as an organization. In a lot of ways, the Imperial Academy was set up just like the Sith academies of old. You did have very important structures in place with endless regulations on what you can or can't do, but again, cheating and sabotage and the occasional murder were not uncommon at most Imperial academies, and you only got in trouble if they could catch you. The individuals who rose to the top weren't always the most competent or brave or smartest individuals. Sometimes they were the biggest crooks, the biggest manipulators and bullies, the biggest social climbers. Such was the culture of the Empire, and also the Sith Empire. And so by creating that rumor that Project Stardust would be given to Tarkin, Emperor Palpatine creates an antagonistic relationship between Krennic and Tarkin from the very beginning. By design, Palpatine wanted Tarkin to take over this terrifying machine with force. After all, how could a person who is afraid of power wield such a devastating weapon? And so when Tarkin fires the Death Star at Orson Krennic's face while he's flailing around on Scarif, this was exactly what Palpatine wanted from him. A man who was willing to kill millions or even billions without questioning his orders. In a lot of ways, Tarkin was like the perfect Sith apprentice. Tarkin was raised from a young age to believe that strength and might were extremely important, and that the strong always defeated the weak. He was cunning and capable, and most importantly, he was loyal to Palpatine. As the Imperial Senate grew weaker and weaker, it would be sector moffs or military governors who would rule the galaxy for Emperor Palpatine. Grand Moff Wilhulf Tarkin would be placed in charge of the turbulent Outer Rim, which is where most rebel activity would take place. Palpatine could count on Tarkin to be ruthless and not concerned with the consequences of his actions, like Thrawn would be. It was Tarkin who would arrange for the destruction of the clone trooper program and Tipica City. He would use Admiral Rampart as a scapegoat for his actions. Tarkin would crush dissidents on Mon Cala shortly after the rise of the New Order and occupy the planet. He would also be placed in charge of the Western Reaches pacification operations, which sought to get rid of the last Separatist holdouts. Ultimately, Thrawn and Palpatine both understood the power of fear, and at the same time, they were both slaves to that emotion. It was this fear that made Tarkin and Palpatine so obsessed with power. What is now known as the Tarkin Doctrine started out as a series of media interviews outlining Tarkin's vision for the galaxy. By this time in Imperial rule, Emperor Palpatine had already receded from public view, It had become this mysterious and almost godlike entity, as dictators often do when they completely embrace the cult of personality. And as a god, it's likely that Palpatine used Tarkin as his mouthpiece, because gods don't make mistakes, they don't give out policies that could potentially fail. It's up to their underlings to take that responsibility. It was around this time that Tarkin would be given a verbal confirmation by Palpatine that the Death Star would be beneath his control. And the rest is history. And so, to summarize, in Tarkin, Palpatine found a kindred spirit, a ruthless and strong individual who believed that fear was really the way to control individuals. Tarkin was also smart enough and competent enough to be trusted with his most secret military operations. But Tarkin's lack of Force abilities and displayed loyalty made him the perfect extension of Palpatine's rule. When Palpatine made the mistake of investing so much credits and resources into the Death Star program, it would ultimately be Tarkin who would take the fall and die from its failure. Which of course is the way of the dictator. Take responsibility for all successes and delegate all failures.